Good evening, everyone. I'm Rick Bierschbach. I'm the Dean of Wayne State Law School. Welcome to this memorial celebration of the life of Professor Emeritus Edward James Littlejohn. I want to thank you all for being here. So for me, it's hard to know where to start when talking about Ed. I think if you read the beautiful and moving overview of his life and achievements in the program, which if you haven't read it, I encourage you to do that, really well captures how remarkable a man he was and how far-reaching was his impact. Coming from nothing and facing all of the challenges that confronted a Black man, let alone a Black man with little means or support, he had such a profound effect on all of us in so many ways and through so many things. And that's because he was so many things, right? You get that sense when you read this overview in the program. He was an athlete, he was a scholar, he was a sharpshooter, he was a postal worker, he was a chess champion, he was a student, he was a law professor and an associate dean. He was a scholar. He was an advocate. He was a public servant. He was a mentor. He was a teacher. He was a collector of art. He was a historian. He was an incredible storyteller. He was a benefactor. He was a friend. He was a father. He was a grandfather. He was self-taught and he was self-made. And he was, as one of you said to me, a true polymath. He did it all, and he did it all well. But words on a page, the words in that program, or even spoken words, can't really capture what to me was the best and most meaningful part of Ed. And that's what it was like to know him and to work with him and to be around him and to talk to him. So more than most of you here, I was a latecomer to the gift that was Edward Littlejohn. I first heard Ed's name when I came to Wayne Law to become the dean in 2017. It was from Peter Hammer. Ed had been considering establishing an endowed chair at the law school's Damon J. Keith Center. And I, as the dean, was pulled in to help steward and finalize that gift. Deans talk to a lot of donors, right? And sometimes, if you're lucky, those conversations can blossom in unexpected and profound ways. Ed did give his gift to the law school. It was one of many that he gave. But he also gave that other gift of which I just spoke. He gave the gift of himself. And he gave that to me in spades. When I first talked to him via phone, he was down in Sarasota. I had no idea how his presence in my life would grow to become so significant and so meaningful and a source of such joy and inspiration. So what started out as a relationship between a dean and a donor really grew for me into a cherished friendship. I always looked forward to my talks with Ed. In every conversation, he would say something that made me chuckle, often with a sort of irreverent sense of humor. He'd recount some fascinating chapter or something he did that to him seemed like a small thing, but that to me really crystallized just how wide-ranging his interests and his impact in his career had been. He'd talk about the things he was still working on, whether it was his art, or his book, or some other thing. In fact, just 2 weeks before he passed, I spoke with him, he with great enthusiasm, about the awards that No Equal Justice was receiving. And we spoke about finally getting him up here to Detroit to celebrate his book and his gifts to the law school, something I'd been trying to coax him to do for quite a while. Sometimes my conversations with Ed would go on for hours. He always answered the phone with, "Hey, Dean Buddy, how you doing?" That's what he called me, Dean Buddy. "Hey, Dean Buddy, how you doing?" And no matter how much I protested, he would always apologize for taking my time, thinking that I, as the dean, had better things to do. He was wrong about that. I had things to do, but I never had anything better to do. You see, no matter how challenging things were at the time, talking to Ed always left me feeling better. It always left me feeling more grounded, more energized, happier, and more thankful than before I picked up the phone. It always left me feeling more inspired and more optimistic that in this crazy world of ours, things could still turn out. I learned so much from Ed, just from how he approached life and his attitude toward it, his perspective, his strength. So to me, that's the thing, right, that words can't capture, that what's in the program, as beautiful as it is, really can't capture. It's something you had to experience. I miss it, and I miss him more than I can say. For the rest of the celebration tonight, we'll hear from others who experienced Ed and how they did so. Ed's brothers from the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity are going to start us off with their Omega service. Before they do that, though, I want to thank, again, all of you for being here, and I especially want to thank all of our speakers for being here. Some of the speakers came from very far away, as far as the West Coast, so as not to miss this event. I also want to thank everybody who put so much work into organizing this event. A lot of work went into that. That includes many staff at Wayne Law. I want to give a special shout out to Robin Johnson over here, to Professor Peter Hammer, to Jennifer Kennedy and Cynthia Hildreth, who are in our marketing and our events office, to Rob McGregor, and especially to Ed's son, Victor, who put an enormous amount of work and care into making this possible, including designing a lot of the video and the exhibits you see outside. And if you haven't had a chance to look at those, please do take a look at those. Finally, and most important, Victor and Brandon, my heart goes out to you and your families for the loss of your father and your grandfather. I'm privileged to be able to be here to help celebrate him tonight. I'm now going to turn it over to the Alphas for their Omega service.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jerry Todd. I'm the Deputy President of Gangland Catholic Alpha during the program. We're here to adopt our brother after Christ. Call it the Omega chapter. We talk about our brother. We never talk about them in the past. Is always be brother Alpha during the program. My honor to represent our chapter here. I've been a friend of Barb and Victor for a little bit. I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord. He that believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall be lived. O Master eternal, give to each of us the deep consciousness of ourselves, that the spirit of eternity may so direct our thoughts, guide, and control our hearts and lives, that we may serve all mankind. From My banner shall be raised. Let there be light. Let there be light. I saw the light that it was good. Beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In him was the light, and light of you. Then spoke Jesus again to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He that follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. For God, who commanded the light to shine out of darkness, hath shown in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God to the face of Jesus Christ. You are the light of the world. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, says the Lord, which is and which was and which is to come, the Almighty. Amen. Father of light, and giver of light, look with favor upon thy creatures here. And thy blessing, O thou who hast led man to the ages of his existence on the earth of thy spirit. Grant us thy continued guidance. Thou who thou generated love and goodness, heart and desire to fellowship one with other in life's divinity, and increase thy spirit in us. Thou who hast called our brother from his path to the reward of noble thoughts in you. Keep in our memory of us. Thou who art the light of the new heaven, the new earth, the new Jerusalem, the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end of all creation. Grant us our resting place to believe to all who thou hast called, and finally our faith. I'm just saying that I grew up on this, that Florida are bigger. And what we were, we're just both of those losing 5 times, Martin the Bigger on both sides. Oh, at that time, it was black folk everywhere, families, right? Permeated through the entire northwest side of Detroit. Little that thing, people jobs, right? They get up and go do something. You never know who somebody is. They're just hot and there, but what's very there. They are in the back of the church. And that whole circle of life, later on at technical high school, with Martin Victor, we all went, and later when Victor and I connected on social media, we shared the love for great ones. And I'm out in New York for business, and I'm reading it in my home, my wife and I. And we happened that I'm an alpha. And people said, hey, well, you're an alpha. Like, you know what, Dad, no, like, get out of here. Like, holy, comedy. I don't know. Because it's no. So we called Dad, and I got good grades, I got Littlejohn, and I did background research, right? And I found that here when you're, but I got his autobiography. I wanted to show him, even this is the last month we got Sarasota, Florida, that know how to take care of it. Mike well now, I don't remember the thing. And talking about life, better that's I never would have known that. But I'm obviously here to the president. I've heard. All the heart, the mind, and the knowledge of our Lord, and may the blessing of God on Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost be amongst you. That includes our main service.
Thank you again to the Alphas for that wonderful service. I'll turn it over now to the Honorable Dennis Archer, the former mayor of the city of Detroit, with whom Ed served in multiple capacities. So Mayor Archer, thank you.
Thank you, Dean, and thank all of you for coming this evening. Edward Littlejohn was outstanding, wise, and caring. His demeanor, temperament, and presence was far above his age and impressed those of us who met him when we all started our legal education at the Detroit College of Law. All graduated from college and most were employed. And most of us started our law school experience by working during the day and going to law school at night. My law school classmates had impressive employment. We were the largest class of Black law students at Detroit College of Law, and there more than any other of the law schools in the state of Michigan. In my view, there was one law student who stood out from all the rest of us, Edward Littlejohn. It was his demeanor, his presence, his wisdom, his law school grades, and how he carried himself with confidence and purpose. His confidence and thirst for knowledge about Black lawyers, who they were, their contribution, and what they had overcome to become successful. Ed had insatiable curiosity. At the time we started law school in 1966, there was only one office building downtown in Detroit that rented space to Black lawyers, the Tobin Building. There were no Black associates or partners in the large white law firms in the state of Michigan. Yet, these Black women and men who graduated at the top of their class at law schools, including the University of Michigan, some of these men and women were spending time on their own in the South, helping Blacks who wanted to register to vote. These lawyers were giants and motivated all of us to achieve our personal goals. Ed Littlejohn started at Wayne to become a doctor, but he had to drop out because he ultimately had no place to live and became homeless. He joined the Army and used the GI Bill to return to Wayne State University and graduated with a degree in sociology. He then started law school at the Detroit College of Law. As the early years progressed, Ed Littlejohn and Judge Donald Hobson knew the names of every Black lawyer in the state, when these lawyers passed the bar exam, and where they went to work as a lawyer. There was only one Black bar association in the state of Michigan, the Wolverine Bar Association. Ed Littlejohn started teaching at the Detroit College of Law and later accepted the offer to join Wayne State University faculty in 1972. Ed Littlejohn did seminal research and wrote a number of articles on the history of Michigan's African-American lawyers and judges and their contribution to their communities and their clients. He was the founder, a principal contributor, and first director of the Damon J. Keith Law Collection of African-American Legal History at Wayne State University Walter P. Reuther Library. He gifted an endowed chair to the Damon Keith Center for Civil Rights. Ed Littlejohn had respect for talent with a similar commitment as his, and he recently demonstrated that when he asked Professor Peter Hammer to co-author a book about a lawyer and judge respected deeply and spent years working on it because of his love and admiration for this outstanding person. They recently co-authored No Equal Justice, The Legacy of Civil Rights Icon George W. Crockett Jr., published by Wayne State University Press. Their book won and has earned a number of awards. Professor Hammond, Ed and I talked a lot, and he admired you and he really appreciated your talent. A final note. Ed had a passion and a successful love beyond his children, grandchildren, and family. That was his enormous talent for art. He was absolutely a successful art collector. He chose new and talented artists, one who will speak here today, but respected and admired the masters. He was financially successful. I purchased art from Ed, and he contributed art and money to the Michigan State University College of Law, formerly the Detroit College of Law. He was selective and generous with his world of art. If you ever come to our home, you will find the art we bought from Ed and from the artists that he was proud to know and provided advice. Edward James Littlejohn, I will miss you. Our conversations, your sage advice, your willingness to offer suggestions to me when we were in law school and while I was mayor of the city of Detroit. Ed, you would have been very proud of your son, Victor, whom I worked with and visited with in preparation for today. Ed, I will miss our friendship, but I promise you, you will be long remembered in the Archer household. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Archer. So you heard from Mayor Archer how even as a student, Ed had a big impact on his fellow students. So imagine the impact that he had as a faculty member. We've got a number of former students here tonight, and one of them is going to speak next. Fred Herring, who's of course a Wayne Law alumnus, was a student of Ed's. And if you read our last issue of the Wayne Lawyer, you know that Ed so inspired Fred that Fred followed in Ed's footsteps and also endowed a faculty position here in Ed's name. Fred's now the General Counsel of Fisher Investments, and I'm happy to welcome him here tonight. Fred.
Thank you, Dean. I'm one of thousands of Professor Littlejohn's students, and I'll never call him Ed. He will always be Professor Littlejohn. And I think that's the way he'd want to have it. If you had told me 3 months ago, let alone 29 years ago, when I first had him for summer torts, that I would be up here speaking, I'd say very improbable. If you told me that I followed the great Mayor Archer, I'd say further improbable. Sir, you were a good friend of his. He spoke of you in torts class. I'll tell you afterwards some of the neat things. No, he loved you. And we love you because I was living in Detroit in the 90s when you were mayor. And I know this is about Professor Littlejohn, but what you've done for the city of Detroit. My wife, who I met in law school here, and my daughter are staying at the Shinola Hotel. Sorry, I do know shit from Shinola. That wouldn't have been there, and some of the other buildings wouldn't have been there. I also briefly worked at Dickinson Wright, and you spoke to us and you said, we have one Class A building, we need more. Well, I see a lot of cranes now, so thank you. But the most improbable, perhaps, if you had told me that right now I'd be speaking when the Detroit Lions are 5-1, I'd say not happening. So I think I'm just going to go sit down, get on the airplane and take off. But seriously, it is an honor. And I thank the dean for helping put this on. My condolences to Victor and Brandon and the rest of the family. I do know what it is, what it's like to lose a father. Many of us do, or a parent. It will stay here, and it will be amazing years later what that will do for you. Many others here know Professor Littlejohn much better than I do. I had him for only one class, summer torts, but what an impact that was on me and so many others. I was also his research assistant. I was pretty crappy at that part because I actually wanted to read all of his treasure trove, which Peter, you know about, and Mayor Archie, you know about, boxes and boxes and boxes. The fact that he took the time to allow me to do that and not write nearly as much as I should have is great. But so my knowledge was basically him in the classroom and the care that he gave. And it taught me something so that years later, I decided to write a letter. I actually encourage you to write the letter. I mean, to read the letter, not because it's good. It's probably a B+, but it's an A in spirit. It was actually only a second draft, but I wanted to get it to him before Christmas. And I think he was touched by it, but I think a lot of people recognized him. Who takes people on field trips? You don't even go on field trips in high school anymore, let alone law school. We went in courtrooms. He took us to different places. I mean, just amazing. Who does that kind of stuff? But what it really taught me was a legal education is not a transaction. It's not a one-time transaction. Very little in life is a one-time transaction. It's not a trade school. And I'm sorry, Dean, and I understand you actually agree with me, but it's not about bar passage rate. There are classes to take for that, right? Kaplan or whatever to pass the bar. It's about a formative experience, learning about the law, but about life itself. I'm sorry, I'm going to preach for a moment. It has stayed with me. The things he would talk about. It wasn't just about torts. It was about life and how that applied. He encouraged us to read books, to read newspapers. I still do that. I read 4 newspapers a day. It's getting a little thinner, a little bit more difficult. I'm a little bit more cynical about newspapers, but the fact is that he taught me those things. He taught all of us that. He cared about people. He was tough. Yes, he was demanding. We all like to think about people like him and how he'd take you under his wing. No, there was no wing with Professor Littlejohn. He was all about agency. You're an agent for yourself. He actually taught a class in agency, which I didn't take, but he was about, you need to figure this out for yourself. I will help you. I will take you in. We will talk, but you're on your own. And I think that was wonderful. The fact that I happened to write a letter and get to talk about this, what an honor it is. But he was inspirational. He was demanding. He had presence. What else do I know about him and remember about him? Because I'm trying to make this quick because many others know him in different ways. He had a chuckle. Anybody remember his chuckle? He had a bit of a chuckle and he had a stare. Anybody see that stare? Sometimes it was a chuckle and a stare. And sometimes it was a good chuckle and a good stare, but sometimes it actually taught you to think again. Really, Mr. Herring, is that is that true? It got you to rethink that, and it actually prepared me for life, for demanding people, for judges, for bosses, for colleagues. You know, we talk about an art collector, and I actually ended up buying art as well. I try not to use the word collector because yes, while he did collect, he was an appreciator. He loved it. He loved art. And so more recently, he called me out of the blue, which was really sweet. And he knew I bought art and my intends to focus more on Mexican artists. And he started quizzing me about that. And I thought I was back in law school again. And he's like, you need to understand more about it. Have you done this, this, and this, and this? I love that. I love that about him. I guess I'll close with the fact of what's the lesson here, at least for me, and for those who are students or anything else, is write that letter. Those who have influenced you or affected you, write that GD letter. Write it before it's too late. It's never too late, by the way. I waited a while. Do that for mentors, teachers, or the like, because it might mean something to them, but it'll mean something more to you. And so I thank everyone for allowing me to have a few words about him, and I hope we can talk a little bit afterwards. But again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred. And Fred, I can't remember if I told you, but I know that Professor Littlejohn really appreciated your letter because he actually wrote me a little letter about your letter. which is exactly the kind of thing he would do. Right. Yeah, it actually did get about a B plus, but he really appreciated it. And a lot of what you said resonated with me in the conversations I would have with Ed, especially the part about, having your own agency and being demanding. And I say that in the context of occasionally our donor relations office would screw something up, and I heard about it, but in just the right way. From Ed. Nothing with him was ever transactional, that's for sure. And I think our next speaker can speak a lot to that. Professor Peter Hammer has been a longtime friend and collaborator of Ed Littlejohn's and is now the steward of the Damon J. Keith Center, which again, if you read the program, was really something that was catalyzed by Ed's work at the law school. So I'm happy to welcome Professor Hammer up here.
I want to thank everybody for coming out. It's really wonderful to feel this energy and this love for Ed Littlejohn, and seeing how everybody had different perspectives and we're putting these together in a different way. And hopefully we can learn from each other. There'll be a reception that follows. Just wonderful to hear people's reflections and memories and views of Ed. I knew of Ed long before I knew him. He left the faculty in 1996. I joined in 2003. We didn't start working on the Keith Center until 2009. But he was everywhere. I mean, you go through the files as Ed Littlejohn, you hear people's histories. It was what Ed did, and learn all about the Keith collection. So there was this presence behind me long before we ever actually connected. But in learning the histories, and Ed was a historian, and I want to tell an honest history, I also learned how poorly the law school treated him and how poorly the university treated him. And he would confide later that ill treatment led him to retire earlier, right? And I think that's part of the story we also have to be owning and sharing and acknowledging. He started in 1973 on the faculty. This is as affirmative action was heating up. Right? He was on the front lines of fighting affirmative action, creating safe spaces for students, letting paths be created for others to be successful, and absorbing a lot of that negative energy and hatred and racism that was embedded in the law school faculty, embedded in the university. And so I just want to put that into the room and acknowledge that he was a soldier and a warrior fighting those fights and creating opportunities for others. And fearlessly taking on institutional challenges because that's what he thought the right thing to do was. And so that's what he did. My first connection came when he was wanted to find a place to publish this amazing work. And it was amazing it hadn't been published before in a special volume that we created in the Journal of Law and Society called Black Before the Bar. Right. And so we made a whole symposium about Ed's life, and we turned it into a broader tribute to all that he had conducted and accomplished in his life. One of my motivations to doing that was to try to make sure he got the recognition inside the law school that he deserved. And you can never change history, but you can have aspirations to create new experiences for people. And to create a better present moment, and to create a better association in an institution that was once hostile, really now giving him the respect and the honor that he so richly deserved. The symposium then led to all sorts of wonderful interactions, phone calls that you've heard. We have a plaque now in front of the Keith Center acknowledging the creation of the Keith Collection and the important role that the Keith Collection played, and then facilitating and really creating the groundwork upon which we were able to build the Keith Center for Civil Rights, which houses the Keith Collection. The Keith Collection is still an integral part of the work that we're doing at Wayne State Law School. And at some point, he asked if I would be interested in collaborating with him in finishing the Crockett book. That created really a gift, sort of in later life where you get mentors when you need them, and was then a basis for 6+ years of pretty close collaboration, most of it on the phone. The only time I actually met him was when he came up for the symposium on Black Before the Bar, but we would have to have numerous long conversations. He started that book in the 1990s, right? Which is a godsend because he was able to interview Judge Crockett, and you'll actually hear on the book table, his interview, one of his interviews with Judge Crockett being played. So you can hear both of their voices, and that come into the room with us. But he was also very honest, right? And honest about what he perceived as limitations. He said it got to a point he just couldn't write anymore. And he really wanted to finish this book. It was one of the most important things at that point in his life. And so we just started conversations, or what's the narrative arc? We had to sort of agree about what was there. He'd gotten George from birth all the way up to the 1950s, right? So more than half the book had been written. But we had to get George from the 1950s, through all sorts of amazing travails and accomplishments up through the 1990s when he passed. And the process would be, we would sort of agree upon what's the narrative arc? What are we trying to accomplish? What are the main things? And after we had an agreement upon that, I would sort of write the first draft. And he was an amazing editor up until the time he passed. He would get not quite a red pen. We'd go over the phone and just go line by line by line. You can sort of imagine what the red pen looked like on his side, and just go through the editing process and this really rich, deep, healthy collaboration in getting the text to the point that we were both satisfied that this is what we wanted to say and this is what we were going to do. And he had an amazing sense of humor, he would often say to prod me along, said, we got to get this done before I die. So you got to get, work harder. We got to get these deadlines met. And we did. The book came out in February of 2022. It's been received very well. It's amazing to imagine that there could be a world where this biography did not exist, right? The Judge George Crockett, and Ed knew this, right? That was sort of one of the driving things. And Ed was very clear, as much as he might have appreciated Judge Keith, it was Judge Crockett who his mainstay, his hero, right? His ultimate inspiration. And so it was really wonderful to be able to share the publication of that book with Ed, to follow along from sort of applying for this award and that award and receiving these different awards. I think there's more than 6 of them that the book has acquired in the last year. The press has been amazing in support, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the press in a minute. But they've now committed to an audiobook. Right. So it was incredibly important to Ed that this be accessible. So we argued about the price point, right? And the press came forward with a high point on the hardcover, but they put out that paperback book version so quickly and brought the price point down so people could have access to it. And now the audiobook is going to reach people who don't read, right? And many people don't consume books in the same way anymore. So just incredibly excited that this story and Ed's kind of major last contribution is going to be out in the world in a very healthy way. But think about what that says about a man, right? 82 years old, 83 years old, where his passion is getting this book done. Right, the craft that you saw in law school, that kind of brilliance, that commitment, carried through his entire life, right? And I think it's just sort of amazing inspiration for all of us as we're aging to imagine what are we going to be passionate about when we're 86 years old, 87 years old, 88 years old. So it really was a real gift to be able to take that journey with him, and something that I will appreciate for the rest of my life. Imagine this rich life and you only have X amount of time and X amount of people to speak. I would like to acknowledge sort of people that sort of fell into the circle that we shared and aren't able to speak today. Some of them were wonderful tributes, but Judge Victoria Roberts, right? And the sort of amazing influence and relationship that Ed and Judge Roberts had. And if I'm remembering right, you were president of the Wolverine Bar Association when the Red Book was published. So, I mean, that sort of contribution and relationships he had with so many people. The director of the Wayne State University Press, Stephanie Williams, is here, sort of scanning the room. You did heroic work. Your staff did heroic work to make this book come together, to do it in a timely fashion, to really have such a, in my opinion, I shouldn't be the one to judge the quality of it, but just the quality of the production, the cover, all the thoughtfulness that goes into the details to make that wonderful book so successful. Margaret Leary, who is the library emeritus at University of Michigan Law School, is doing a heroic task, very like the Red Book, trying to track down and tell the stories of all the Black graduates of the University of Michigan. And that led her obviously to Ed, who had done something very similar and created another relationship as Ed sort of advising and sharing the experiences he had in his collection of those stories. And finally, just give a shout out to Source Bookstore, who's just an amazing part of our community and their willingness to come and staff this event and make that available. So I just sort of think concluding thoughts, right? Ed had an encyclopedic knowledge of Black history, right? And particularly of Detroit history and the Black history of Detroit. He had an amazing love, as I've said, for Judge Crockett, right? It really sort of was motivating him all through that process from 1990s to 2022 to get that book out in the world. He had a Hollywood caliber voice and storytelling skills. I mean, you just love to sit and listen to Ed. One of my biggest regrets is that he wasn't able to do the audiobook. I mean, I think that would just be the most amazing thing in the world to have Ed Littlejohn read the book to us in his amazing style and his amazing voice. But there was also this amazing wisdom and gentleness, right? A quietness about him. He wasn't jumping up and down. He wasn't, speaking loudly. It was sort of a very powerful, soft voice, soft touch, and this sort of old soul, right? And at the end of the Crockett book, he has a poem by Wade McCree, which was a tribute at the passing of attorney Harold Bledsoe about a tall tree falling, right? And you'll see that in the booklet. I've sort of put that as my coda, right? Of a tall tree falling in the tribute to that. And you'll see that that's the way that the story of his life ends in the booklet as well. But an amazing celebration of an amazing life. So thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you, Peter. Something you said really struck me, which is, I think, just this combination of Ed having so much wisdom and gentleness, and yet he had this sort of unstoppability about him as well. As you said, he just always was going, always was engaged and interested, despite everything he endured. And I'm glad that Peter flagged some of what Ed endured at this law school and in other places, because Ed and I talked about that as well. Certainly he wasn't the only person who experienced it. His Black students who were with him experienced it also. We've got another former student, Alice Jennings, who's going to speak next. And she was one of Ed's students, of course. She's a partner at Edward and Jennings right now. And she's, among other things, a social justice activist and has been for a long time. So I'd like to welcome Alice here now. Alice.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. To see all of you. Well, first to the family, I just want to say thank you for so many years sharing Professor Littlejohn with us. He was truly a full human being, I guess would be what I would say. He was what they used to call a Renaissance man or a Renaissance person. And so I want to thank all of you for being here today. Peter, thank you for inviting me to speak regarding Professor Littlejohn. Thank you to the dean. The family, I know that there will be a period of loss, and then at a certain point, as time goes on, there will be a smile as you remember your father and remember the good times. Of course, grief is very normal. Building a legacy here at Wayne State University Law School for Professor Littlejohn, it was all about getting us ready for the world. I mean, he really wanted us to know that we were going out into a world that wasn't necessarily going to be friendly to us. My partner in life, love, and law, Carl Edwards, and I both attended Wayne State University, and there were some fights here at Wayne State. Some of those fights have been mentioned. At the time I arrived here in '75, we were really the first class of students where women were a part of the group that was sitting in the room. And in fact, I'll say this about Professor Littlejohn. he really appreciated being in the company of women. I mean, he was a man who liked the women, and he appreciated the intellect. He appreciated the way that women maybe would come at an issue a little bit differently. And so we had many conversations about things like our kids and our children and what our children meant to us, and our family and what our family meant to us. He was generous of spirit. He was a warm human being. He did not really put people down. That wasn't his thing. If anything, he wanted to build us up. For me, as his researcher back in probably 77, gosh, that was over 40-something years ago. It's a long time. He took me to the home of Frances Dent's widow. And she lived right there on Oakland Boulevard. And what I remember about Professor Littlejohn is he walked into the house and said, "What do you have to eat?" He was like right down to earth. He didn't have any airs about him. She would always have food for him. And then we would talk about Frances Dent and the landmark case that Frances Dent had that made it possible for many of us to live in homes in the city of Detroit as equal human beings. In fact, Frances Dent and the team of lawyers that he was working with was able to take a case to the US Supreme Court and have racial covenants in real estate in the city of Detroit declared illegal. And it was that type of experience, not in the classroom per se, but in the real world of our community, that I learned so much from Professor Littlejohn, because he cared about people. One of the things that I learned about him most recently is that he worked for the welfare department, the ADC, poor people, people who in this society generally are not looked at in a way that with any concern. But he worked with the ADC office, the welfare office, and with young people in his community. He must have taught me some of that, because now as Carl and I work on cases, including trying to make sure that our citizens here in Detroit have water, clean, safe, affordable water for everyone, not just in the Detroit now, but now the full state of Michigan. And now we're working on national legislation with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. It was Professor Littlejohn that gave me the courage as a student here at Wayne State Law School to go out and to even have the confidence and to think, this is what it's all about. And for the most part, it's pro bono. There's no money attached to it at all. It's because you care about the community that you serve. I would just say that most recently, with the tribute that was held at the end of last year, Carl and I have been talking about Professor Littlejohn probably more than we have for many years because of the book. And the book set forth for us the fact that there were giants that walked amongst us here in Detroit that cared about people, that fought. They went all over the country for justice. And so it is that legacy, building a legacy as it relates to Wayne State Law School and Professor Littlejohn's legacy, that we look at now. It's what we hold up. It is that type of caring, it is that kind of honor that each of us who maybe you are practicing law, it may not be personal injury, it may not be civil rights, but if you care about human beings, whatever law you're practicing, whatever kind of work you're doing, you can carry that type of legacy of love with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alice. So we're privileged and proud that a lot of Professor Littlejohn's legacy is associated with Wayne Law. But of course, he got to start at a different law school. And that was his springboard to at least everything he did in the law that came afterward. And so I'm very happy to have Dean Linda Green of Michigan State University Law School, which formerly was Detroit College of Law, and the foundation professor of law there as well, to speak tonight. Dean Green.
Thank you so much. Great. What an honor to be able to speak here in celebration of the life of Professor Emeritus Edward J. Littlejohn. I first learned about Professor Littlejohn when I entered my dean's conference room for the first time in June 2021. I said to myself, as I scanned the room, that's Wilfredo Lamb, the Cuban artist. I saw others I recognized. As a former museum board member, I started digging and I learned that the art in the Dean's Conference Room, in fact, the Dean's Conference Room is named the Edward J. Littlejohn Dean's Conference Room because of the amazing art contributions he made to Michigan State University College of Law. So I was really curious about the donor, and I reached out to our development person to find out more. And shortly thereafter, I believe late in 2021, I had several phone conversations that left me marveling at his passion and his knowledge about the visual arts, and especially not only the great established Black artists, but the amazing emerging Black artists as well. And then also his passion for telling the story of Black lawyers in Michigan. I shared that passion as well, coming as I do from the Thurgood Marshall family out of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where we, even as young lawyers, had the chance to say hello to a Spotswood Robinson, to actually meet people like Oliver Hill, Derek Bell, Constance Baker Motley, Judge Carter, etc. And so this idea about the importance of Black lawyers in American society, not simply that they became lawyers, but they actually wrote into our law a meaningful approach to equal protection under law, to the motto on the Supreme Court, equal justice under law. So we shared those things immediately. So we talked for a while, and my advancement person was holding up a sign. You have another meeting. You have another meeting. And so I said, so Before the conversation was over, he did not ask me to read his articles about Black lawyers in Michigan. He told me to read the articles, and of course, I complied. My development officer and I had the chance to visit him in Florida in the summer of 2022. He gave us a grand tour of his home that was his art gallery then, and he said his current collection then was just a fraction of what he had previously, but what he had there were absolutely amazing works. And I should also say that he had as many works by Black male artists as he had of Black female artists. He really supported Black female artists. Again, this is an hour-and-a-half visit to his home, and I learned these things about him. He was as proud of his contribution to the support and the development of Black artists as he was to his contributions to the education of so many students, including his Black students. In the old days, we would say, coming in the movies, we'd wait a while, wait until the loop came back and say, this is where I came in. And so this is where I came in to the story of Professor Littlejohn. And also he came in to our story at Michigan State University College of Law because he graduated from Detroit College of Law, our predecessor law school, graduating second in his class. He was a leader in law school, founder and executive board member of the Wolverine Student Bar Association and the Black Law Students Association. And of course, excuse me, in those days, the Black law students were as important and instrumental in the transformation of historically white law schools as anyone, including the faculty. Upon graduation, he made history as the first African-American member of the Detroit College of Law faculty. And at that time, there were probably very few Black professors, perhaps less than a dozen, teaching outside of the historically Black law schools, such as Howard University. He taught at Detroit College of Law. He taught at Detroit College of Law for 2 years. And then, of course, you know, he went on to Wayne State, but he maintained his ties to the law school through his contributions to student scholarships and also, excuse me, the artwork he provided to us as gifts. In turn, his record of achievement, his record of teaching, scholarship, and community service distinguished him as one of our most accomplished graduates. Thus, in 2016, the Michigan State University Law Alumni Association celebrated his achievements with the George N. Bashara Jr. Distinguished Alumni Award that the Alumni Association presents to the most outstanding alumni who are leaders in law. In addition to providing scholarships for students who are parents, he was most generous, as I've said before, to MSU College of Law with his gifts of visual artwork. He commissioned this sculpture, We the People, and that was executed by the artist Bennett Owens and Pittman. At 6 feet and also on the 4th floor across from our beautiful Haley courtroom and near our large classes, the work is an integral part of the experiences of our students, eternally posing the enduring question under our Constitution, who are we the people? We also have Celebration of Heritage by Jacob Lawrence. Here we have the 3 works by Wilfredo Lamb, the Cuban artist I mentioned earlier. And there are other works from other genres, classics by Honoré Daumier about the legal profession, and also by Aaron Douglas. Since he was our student and spent his formative intellectual years at Detroit College of Law, we do take credit for his work. But I know that An intellect like that is not the product of simply educational institutions, that his intellect, his curiosity, his Renaissance traits, his polymath abilities, I know originated in his home and makes me more curious about his upbringing. He proved his intellectual acumen beyond a reasonable doubt, earning a master's at Columbia Law School, as well as the Doctor of Juridical Science at the school. Again, but Michigan State takes credit and Detroit College of Law take credit for recognizing his talent early on and placing him in front of a classroom long before other law schools dared to have a Black man teach law. He wrote, of course, about the history of lawyers and their role in promoting social change. He was a scholar activist on the role of the police in community. He wrote articles about that role, but he did that after he served as one of the first members of the police commission began by Mayor Coleman Young. Again, he continued to write on the history and contributions of Black lawyers. And again, not simply saying that they existed in their practice, but also connecting their work again to the realization of equal citizenship for Blacks in the state of Michigan. Other works as well. Of course, his opus work, published to rave reviews, is No Equal Justice on the legacy of the Honorable George W. Crockett Jr. and the celebration of this extraordinary legal, judicial, legislative, and social justice leader. We are proud to have equal justice, No Equal Justice in our collection, and also I'm proud to display it on my desk. His legacy lives on in our minds and in our hearts. We draw inspiration from his life as we educate the next generation of lawyers who will serve diverse communities in Michigan and beyond. Thank you so much to the Littlejohn family for this opportunity to share the Michigan State College of Law part of his amazing journey. We will never forget him, and every day we are inspired by his generosity and his achievement, even as we go about our daily work. So thank you again for the opportunity to share my thoughts about Professor Littlejohn.
Thank you, Dean Green. So much of what you said is a good segue into our next speaker because we've heard a lot tonight about Ed's appreciation of and promotion of and understanding of, support of, and even education of some of us about art. And so Gail Ross, who's a very well-known artist herself, but also a mentee of Ed's, has joined us tonight. Gail?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me clearly? Okay, good evening, and I want to thank the Littlejohn family for allowing me an artist to come and speak this evening for a gentleman who has been a big influence on my career. So I have to read it because I'm visual. Dr. Edward J. Littlejohn wasn't only a renowned professor of law. He was a serious art collector, a very important art collector for American artists of African descent. He collected my work. He introduced me to many others, including several here tonight, who've become collectors and friends. I'd like to tell you a quick story of how Edward once demonstrated his love of art and his purposeful humanity. In or around 2003 in Sarasota, Florida, I was one of 6 artists asked to paint on a full-size fiberglass cow to be auctioned at one of the city's most elite art fundraisers. I did not get paid for this. It was considered enough just to be asked. To my recollection, I was the only woman and the only artist of African descent to even be invited. I covered the cow with images of 3 jazz musicians. Once finished, the 2 women who were responsible for the auction and my invitation to participate came to my studio to see my work. After taking in the cow for several minutes, one asked me to consider painting out the faces by turning them into circles and shapes, both big and small, because they would not be able to sell a cow covered with Black people. Nobody would bid on that cow, and you won't be able to sell it in the auction, she said assertively. No, I said, matching her tone. I will not paint circles on my jazz cow. Of course, this conversation went on for days leading up to the event. The day of the fundraiser, I was on a local talk show where they included a photo of me and the cow. The committee was threatening not to show it, but because of the TV show, they relented. I suggested they give it to me, but they said the cow couldn't because they owned the cow. I called up Dr. Edward Littlejohn, and I told him all about what happened. He said he would go to the event and bid on the cow. Now, I don't believe he had any intention of owning a very colorful, full-size fiberglass cow. Nevertheless, I was happy to hear that he would go, and sure enough, he came to the event. It was on the bayfront under several long white tents, but only 5 of the 6 cows were on display. Together, Ed and I found one of the women who'd asked me to paint over the faces of my cow. Where's Gail's cow? He asked calmly while I was trying not to go berserk. Before she could answer, he said, I want to buy it. You want to buy that cow? Yes. How much is it? It's a donation, I can't tell you, an amount because it's what you want to bid or donate. Calmly, he said, where's the cow? He said again, and she led us to the last tent being used as storage. There stood my art amongst folding chairs and tablecloths. I could hear my heart. The woman looked sheepish. Ed said, is the bidding over? Yes, she said. How much was the highest bid? $18,000, she answered. I will pay $18,000 for this cow. Her demeanor rose, color came back to her cheeks, and she said, "You're going to buy this cow for $18,000. Yes, he said, but I'm only donating 2,000 to your organization. I'm giving the artist $16,000. Had the cow been in the show as advertised, your organization would have gotten $18,000. He proceeded to take out his checkbook and write 2 checks. I was no longer miffed. I will never forget the look on her face as he told her when and where to deliver the cow. Now, I'm telling you the story because Dr. Littlejohn did not have to do that. He didn't do it easily. That's not the way he purchased art. He liked to buy low and sell high. That's the game. But on this day, feeling the bent, unbroken spirit of an artist, he masterfully saved the art. Dr. Littlejohn endeavored to have the art of the people who have been deemed America's permanent underclass included in the canon of the greater art world. So he collected the work of his culture. Collecting for him was a legitimate reaction to the fact that a certain kind of art is considered important to certain circles of people, and a certain kind of art is not on the same level of importance. He appreciated art, not for just the pleasure it brought him, but more importantly, the purpose it may serve in the life of humankind and that of humanity. Finally, I believe Dr. Edward Littlejohn, Ed, the collector, knew inherently that we must cease considering art a means to pleasure and consider it one of the conditions of human life. Thank you.
Gail, thank you so much for that. That story was about art, but I feel like it could have been about anything in terms of what it said about how Ed approached life and what he stood for. So we have 2 more speakers tonight, and they're both part of Ed's family. So I'll welcome the first here, and that is Brandon Littlejohn, Ed's grandson. Brandon.
So it's taken me a while to figure out exactly what I'd say today. I didn't realize that deciding to speak tonight would set me off on a journey to write what became impossible to articulate. Some days I'd wake up with the sun, racing to capture words sent to me in dreams before they faded away. Some nights I'd hurdle up the West Side Highway, iPhone in hand, typing endlessly into a digital void because writing always came easiest after a night out and a few libations. Mostly, I'd write and rewrite, at one point volleying back and forth between at least 2 drafts, each with their own unique thesis and conclusion, all in a futile attempt to land the perfect speech. But nothing ever felt enough. Because how do you summate a life so well lived as that of Edward James Littlejohn, my grandfather? And it's pretty simple. You don't. You can't. I mean, seriously, the first draft, his obituary was at least 5 pages long, and it would have cost like $6,000 to publish. So that's when I let go of trying to pen a draft worthy enough to face my granddad's expert intellect and red ink. And on the other side of chasing literary excellence was revelation. My grandfather was the blueprint. And part of me does mean that quite literally. If you stand me, my father, and my uncle side by side, there's no question whose bloodline we belong to. However, in all seriousness, my grandfather was the smartest man I knew. Not just book smart, not just lawyer smart, but smart as in he understood and saw the world in a way not capable for many. And I was lucky to witness a glimpse of it. I was lucky to never lose the childish admiration rooted in innocence. When you're still ignorant to the fact that your granddad's name isn't actually granddad, not understanding that his life and influence existed well beyond the limited scope of my reality, that his adjectives, his accolades, insert, father, veteran, lawyer, professor, art connoisseur, philanthropist, change agent, author, and many more, actually meant something to the world and other people in it. That he was essentially, excuse my language, the shit. A giant among men, not just to me, but to countless others. So as of late, there are two moments in time that stick out to me. It's 2005. I'm a freshman at the University of Michigan, and I was dead set on becoming an alpha. In one of our calls, I casually mentioned I was trying to join the frat, and he goes, "Oh yeah, the alphas? I pledged alpha in like 1955 at Wayne State. What they up to these days?" And he continues on, not really expecting an answer, but picture me on the other end of the line, speechless, floored, because I didn't know this. Here I was thinking I was forging a new path, and yet again, I'm just following his footsteps, following his blueprint. Looking back, this all makes sense because if you ever read There Goes an Alpha Man, it almost reads as if you're reading his bio. Certain lines like, a man of high impulse, of princely mien and grace, a man of noble cast, whom hardship cannot break, a man whose life is spent in service, not in scorn, a man to help uplift the lives of wholesome youth, the best man in and out. Looking back, it made sense that he didn't need to brag or boast about who he was or what he done. He was manly deed, scholarship, and love for all mankind personified. So when he dropped that tidbit on me at 17, that's when it all clicked. That's when I finally saw him through the world's eyes and not just my own. Cut to late May of this year. I'm headed off to London for a weekend with friends, and before I left, we'd had a lengthy convo about life, my job, inevitably a little bit of Black history and politics, what I was looking forward to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we were really yapping. The kind of conversation where each, and one more thing before I let you go, takes you on another 30-minute detour of conversation. It was in this moment, for the first time, I could tell that even with all of his amazing life experiences, he was not only surprised and excited for me, but proud. And not just in a, this my grandson proud, but proud that I was stepping into an uncharted territory, proud that I surpassed what he thought might have been possible, proud that the blueprint was expanding. So, for everything I have in this life, for who I am, and who I've yet to be, I owe a lot to my grandfather. It's something I can never repay, but doesn't mean I won't spend a lifetime trying. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. And our final speaker tonight is Ed's son, Victor Littlejohn. Victor.
Good evening. I want to just thank everyone at the law school, dean, and everyone for making this event possible. It's quite overwhelming, and I've always found that in someone's passing, you seem to learn more about them than in life. And it's one thing that I've been learning daily about my father. And because I always knew him as my dad, but I had no idea what a giant he was. You know, the things that he did, how he operated, how he changed people's lives. What humanitarian was, how humble he was. And it's just amazing, and people come up to me and say, your father did this for me, your father did that for me. He's such a great guy. And he was a great guy. And he was a self-made man, a Renaissance man. I forget who said that, but that was a great, great word, Renaissance man. And, you know, he was a great guy, and, I miss him every day, as do my brother Martin and my nephew Brandon. And, losing track, because this is all quite emotional for me. And, as I said, he did everything well, and he, you know, he wanted to be, he collected art. And when he started to collect art, I always thought that I was the one that got him to collect art, because I was an artist. I went to art school. And maybe that was it. Maybe it wasn't. I really don't know. But I just, you know, I'm really overwhelmed, and I thank everyone for coming out this evening. And we have some refreshments in the next room. And thank you.
Thank you, Victor. And thank you again to all of our speakers who shared their stories of Ed tonight. We heard many times tonight, Ed loved a good story. He was a great storyteller himself. And while given his characteristic humility, I'm sure he would think this is all a little bit too much. I'm sure he's also looking down and smiling right now. You know, reflecting on the stories we heard tonight, again, what's remarkable to me, and many of you have said it, many of the speakers said it, is the depth and breadth of Ed's influence and impact on all of us. And I guess that's what happens with a truly great person, right? Their impact cuts across different communities, different groups of people, different identities, different generations. I think Professor Hammer said, there's so many other people who could get up here tonight and tell stories about Ed. I'm sure there's hundreds and thousands of people who could tell stories about Ed. And so I hope you all continue to do so, not just tonight, but always, for years to come. Because again, as Professor Hammer referenced, and to borrow from Judge McCree's poem that's in the booklet, all of this, all of us are Ed's seedlings, right? His most lasting legacy. And so I just want to thank you all again for being here to celebrate that legacy tonight. This concludes our formal portion of the program, but we do have refreshments and a reception here in the atrium. And so I hope you'll all join us outside there where we can continue to share fellowship and stories and celebrate Ed and his memory. Thank you for being here.